So, who am I and why am I doing this? Well, I'm a first year Doctor of Psychology student with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. Sometimes in exercises or in the classroom, we use examples to illustrate psychological theory for educational purposes. Uh, Public figures make sturdy examples for non clinical work since we often have hours and hours of public statements and behavior to engage with as data. It's super important to note that this isn't a formal clinical assessment, nor could it be. And it would be impossible and unethical to portray this discussion as that. All we're looking at here is Shoe0nHead's public statements, behavior, and meta influence, and how those may inform today's topic. So, Shoe0nHead is a popular YouTuber with 1.2 million subscribers. Before anyone asks, she is not boxy. They're kind of close in age, and that's not some kind of unclever shade, but people unironically ask that a lot, especially on the Reddits. It's kind of like the same way LCD Sound System isn't from England, and people conflate internet people all the time. The main focus of Shoe0nHead's work is reaction cringe videos about SJWs. That being said, she has a long background as a YouTube skeptic who actively rejects far right conservatism but thinks Black Lives Matter is too far to the left. Her brand is pretty much mocking BuzzFeed feminist videos or teenage liberal arts students and getting about 1 million views per video doing so. And, that's a grads on her. This isn't about her popularity. It would be impossible for me to punch down at this point, but I'm certainly not punching up for clicks. She just really has some content I'd love to talk about today. And I'll link the video about her most recent political position from May 2019, just so that no one can say I'm misrepresenting her declared stance. She rose to prominence during Gamergate as an anti feminist, and she declares that she's wrangling in the left and feels ostracized from the left by doing so. And meanwhile, she has objectively gathered a pretty large conservative reactionary audience, whether or not that was intentional or not. Uh, from that, even if only a third of her subscribers were conservatives, and even if another third were centrists, um, that's kind of her favorite. She likes centrism, not necessarily because she believes in it, because she respects it, but even if those were equal portions, that's still 800,000 subscribers between those two camps, and that's being fair because her subscription base is most certainly not majority to the left. So anyone claiming that she's doing a service for progressive ideas is starting from a pretty rough position. So what gives? And is she genuine and doesn't matter? Well, rather than asking an unsatisfying research question like that, whether or not we have to mind read if she believes what she's saying and if she's happy with her social media footprint. We're going to take a different direction in this video and simply talk about social psychology theories about persuasion, and we're going to use her content as a really solid example of what ambiguity looks like about people, I guess, being unsure where someone's coming from or what side they're at. And that may or may not be important. We'll explore that. The concept that we're starting with, however, is called the third person effect. And that's how it's described in media. And across the board, it describes how everyone thinks that other people are more susceptible to advertising and commercial media influence than they themselves are. So everyone thinks that, I don't know, everyone else is a patsy, and that the other people are more easily manipulated, and yet they're fine. That they're above the influence. And the thing about that is that that perspective is wrong. The reality is that the science says that no one is highly susceptible to advertising and commercial media influence. It's not that you're above it, it's pretty much that everyone is above it. It's pretty much just doesn't have much weight at all. It's a very weak influence. And so, using this in reference to Shoe0nHead and her audience, people trained in social psychology can say with confidence that if she claims that her material is for entertainment purposes, when she drags young people in her cringe videos, that's most likely true. There's no effective persuasion happening that's going to convince her audience. It's not going to convince people that the left is silly and spurious and somehow her skepticism is more rational. Uh, these kind of gotcha videos that she does only confirms the beliefs on either side. Uh, and that would be the right's belief that this is a fair representation of, academic or BuzzFeed feminism, that it's all very silly. And it would confirm to the left that she's taking uncharitable examples of cherry picking for clicks, rather than discussing valid phenomena like the actual pay gap in institutional violence. Uh, Her argument might be that this kind of discussion isn't what her channel is for, that her channel is an entertainment channel. And it also has the effect of keeping the left honest by doing call outs, and that she can't control who her audience actually is. What she and her audience needs to keep in mind is that goes both ways. And that the cringe videos that she's dragging are most likely seen as entertainment too. And those cringe videos aren't persuading anyone serious about non existent topics like man spreading on subways or armpit hair dyeing. Um, it's the equivalent of wouldn't it be funny if a cat walked on two legs? So, but the point is that if you're interested in those topics like man spreading and armpit hair dyeing, you're likely more interested in more serious topics like gendered grooming standards and whether or not you get touched in public or not, which are obviously valid and a different conversation than the topics that Shoe0nHead is having with her takedown of performative activism. It's been studied in repetition for decades that advertising itself doesn't work, at least not the way we think it does. Advertising is not good for persuasion at all. The effect is weak to non existent when choosing between political candidates or brands of food, clothing, cars, or cosmetics. What advertising is good for is brand awareness, and that includes everything I just mentioned above. The products. You can't choose X if you're not aware of what X is, and being reminded of X is more what the game of advertising is than selling its superiority against Y. And this coincidentally, or not coincidentally, but it helps explain what's behind those kind of ding dong jingles that they're doing now at the start of every car and cell phone commercial. Um, it's more about awareness training than any kind of conditioning to buy X. It's more to just pay attention to X. If this goes to already knowing what you like, with the advertising just being there to confirm that product X exists, especially to remind you that it exists, especially if it's already what you like. And that kind of brings us back around, finally, to Shoe0nHead and other branded YouTubers. And it kind of brings up a different persuasive media effect that is strong. It's a strong effect, not weak like advertising. Uh, You'll hear this effect described as a rabbit hole when it comes to polarized politics on YouTube, like going down the bread tube hole or the alt-right hole, the rabbit hole. Or you'll also hear it described as the Overton window when it comes to politics, which describes which topics get focus, especially in an ever-shifting landscape. But it's really a different concept than entertainment and advertising. In social psychology and political science, it's called agenda control. And that might sound a little spooky, and it might be a little spooky, but what agenda control means is that conversations in the media define their importance and veracity. We've seen this in our recent memorable past as far as the Ebola scare and Benghazi stuff right ahead of previous elections. Definitely that was definitely agenda focus shifting, and we see it every year with the war on Christmas and our seasoned migrant caravans on the southern border. Those are popular talking points every single year, and they get forgotten and then they get brought up again. That's agenda control, and it has to deal with the repetition of a topic. It equals how important it is. So the repetition creates importance. It's really important to note that no one is creating a distraction from bigger issues when they're using agenda control, at least not specifically, where it's not like the conspiracy theorists were talking about, where they're only talking about the migrant crisis because they don't want to talk about arms sales. And this is all kind of multi-layered and on top of itself. So, and it's it's not a distraction because the issues that are being considered important are the ones being talked about. So philosophically, it's a this equals that. It's not necessarily a change in focus. If the focus was on what's important, well, the conversation decides what's important. So that's agenda control. Again, it does have to deal with awareness, but this time it is something that media figures can actually affect, and that includes YouTubers as well. Um, to repeat, people shilling their sponsors only has a weak influence, but people discussing topics at length signals to their audience that a topic is important. So I can't claim this is something everyone at the platform should be aware of ethically. But as we see with people that are, I don't know, widely considered controversial or problematic, the PewDiePies, the Cratters, and the Rogans, the line between dragging something for entertainment purposes, shilling something for awareness, and platforming something to raise its social importance, those all feel different, and that's because they are. Dragging something to make fun of it is a little bit different than selling brain pills, and that's a little bit different than, I don't know, another bathroom scare with trans people or something like that. So those are all three very different things, and that would be entertainment, shilling, and platforming. So that's something to keep in mind, because I don't think anyone would be confused that Jenny Nicholson is platforming the Purge fan fiction featuring One Direction to further a leftist agenda. But when we have Shoe0nHead bringing up something equally ridiculous, cherry picking a ridiculous college student and claiming that that's an example of why there's no really reason why there's a pink tax, or why women aren't disproportionately exploited in the student loan system. That's why those two examples are different. You can't bring up a example of something ridiculous and claim it gives veracity when you're using it to platform the disaffection of that point of view. So the result is that while Shoe0nHead's videos are not persuasive and likely aren't meant to be, they are powerful because they do signal that irrational feminist overreach is an important topic when it most likely is not. Displaying that it's an important topic, sort of displays to a sympathetic audience that their perceptions are accurate when they're sort of biased against feminism, especially internet feminism, isn't even important because they already believe what they believe. But what it does share is that these cringe topics are important and are getting a lot of talking time. And that's the irrational part because they're not. And it signals to her audience that, you know, these cherry picked videos are an acceptable reason to disregard the concerns of millions of people, even when the conversation isn't about legitimate economic hardship or institutional violence. That's not what she's talking about. She's just kind of lampshading or hand waving it away. It's, to her, it's all about people with funny hair talking too loud with kind of jump cuts on their own clickbait videos because that's all those kind of BuzzFeed videos are. And I know the main channels and stuff like that have a pretty large reach, but you know, it's typically an entertainment channel. So for 14 or 18 million subscribers versus her two versus smaller, more politically oriented ones, it's not straw manning at all to punch up at the BuzzFeeds because uh, there's a lot of ridiculous content on there that I think a lot of people, a lot of serious people objectively ignore. But it would be the same as what you see from the left when they really like picking up PragerU videos like they're representative of legitimate discussion of conversations that are happening on the center right. And hey, if people do take that PragerU content seriously, that's something to get debunked. And I'm sure she believes that she's doing part of that by I don't know, calling out man spreading. But when she declares that the pay gap isn't a issue where it's all about choice rather than institutional effects of I don't know how our society works. I absolutely have no idea where she's coming from other than a place of either a gross misunderstanding of societal factors or simply pandering to an audience. But that's something that we just talked about today, and we talked about right now is it entertainment or is it platforming regressive views for I don't know either by misunderstanding or some other reason. And that's not really important to get to the bottom of that. I guess it is more important to separate when and how social theories of psychology become important, especially when it comes to people with a platform. When it comes to understanding how they use their voice and whether or not they're using it effectively and for what purpose. And that was the point of this video. So, thank you. And if you want any more of this style of content, that would be having conversations about media figures, not just theory itself, more application, more practical type of videos, please leave comments or suggestions below. Thank you.